A man sitting in solitary confinement, the most watched prisoner in all of France, gets pulled out of his cell by armed men who dropped onto the prison roof from a helicopter. The whole thing took less than 5 minutes. 0 shots fired. And this wasn't even his first time. By the time French authorities figured out how to stop him, he'd already done it 3 times. Pascal Payet wasn't supposed to become famous. He was born in Montpellier in 1963 and grew up moving between Lyon and Marseille, 2 French cities where organized crime ran deep and getting involved in illegal work wasn't shocking. It was just what happened if you grew up in the wrong neighborhood. Payet started small. At 25, he got convicted of aggravated assault. At 30, conspiracy charges. Nothing that made national news, but enough to show he was comfortable with violence and didn't care much about consequences. Everything changed in 1997. On November 20th, in a town called Salon de Provence in southern France, Payet and a crew of accomplices attacked an armored van belonging to the Banque de France. These vehicles are built like tanks, reinforced steel, armed guards, GPS tracking, routes that change constantly to prevent ambushes. But Payet's team had studied the schedule, mapped the route, and when the van showed up, they hit it hard. During the attack, a security guard named Gérard Cassels was shot. Not once, 14 times. Prosecutors identified Payet as the shooter, saying he'd used a Kalashnikov assault rifle at close range. Cassels died right there. It didn't matter anymore whether the crew got away with the money. A man was dead, and the investigation turned into a manhunt. It took more than a year, but in January 1999, French police finally arrested Payet in Paris. They also grabbed one of his accomplices from the robbery, a man named Eric Alboreo. Both of them were sent to Luynes prison, a small regional facility in the Bouches-du-Rhône area of southern France. It wasn't some high-security fortress, just a standard prison in a quiet village, the kind of place where inmates waited for their trials or served out shorter sentences without much drama. Payet's murder trial wasn't going to happen right away. The French legal system moves slow, especially for complicated cases involving multiple defendants. So Payet had time. A lot of it. Most prisoners in his situation would have spent those months worrying about their sentence or trying to work out a deal with prosecutors. Payet spent them looking up, because Luynes prison had been designed like most prisons in France at the time, with security focused entirely on keeping people from getting out at ground level. High walls, locked gates, guard towers, cameras. But nobody had ever thought about the sky. The prison yard was completely open above. No cables, no netting, nothing to stop a helicopter from landing if someone was crazy enough to try it. And Payet wasn't just crazy enough, he was patient enough. Over the next 2 years, while sitting in his cell waiting for his trial, he quietly coordinated with contacts on the outside. He studied the guard schedules down to the minute. He identified the exact spot in the yard where a helicopter could touch down without being immediately surrounded. He figured out the timing, how fast it would need to happen, how little room there was for error, and how to make sure the guards wouldn't have time to react before it was already over. On October 12, 2001, a helicopter appeared in the sky above Luynes prison without any warning. It dropped fast, landed in the yard, and sat there with its rotors spinning. Payet ran. He wasn't alone. There was another prisoner with him, a man who'd been serving time for separate charges. The 2 of them climbed into the helicopter. It lifted off, and just like that, they were gone. The whole thing lasted less than a minute. One moment the helicopter was on the ground, the next it was disappearing over the horizon. The guards at Luynes stood there trying to process what had just happened. There was no protocol for this, no alarm designed to detect an aircraft dropping into the yard, no emergency response plan for an aerial extraction. By the time anyone thought to call for backup or alert nearby authorities, Payet was already miles away. The prisoner who escaped with him was named Frédéric Impacco. He'd been serving time at Luynes for unrelated charges, and somehow Payet had either convinced him to join the escape or included him as part of the plan. But Impacco wasn't built for life on the run. Within 6 days, police tracked him down and brought him in for questioning in Paris. He was back in custody before the week was over. Payet was different. He'd spent 2 years planning this escape, and that planning didn't stop at just getting out. He knew where to go. how to move, and how to stay invisible. He'd set up a false identity in advance. He had places to stay that weren't connected to his known associates. He relocated constantly, never spending more than a few nights in one location, never doing anything that might draw attention from local police or tip off informants. For months, Pascal Payet lived as a ghost. French authorities put out alerts. They monitored his family, tracked his old contacts, searched properties connected to his criminal network. Nothing. He'd vanished completely. And while they were searching for him, he was planning something even more audacious than his own escape. In April 2003, almost 2 years after breaking out of Luynes, Payet was still a free man, still evading capture. And instead of keeping his head down and enjoying his freedom, he decided to go back. Not physically. He wasn't stupid enough to walk back into a prison. But he organized another helicopter escape from the exact same facility, targeting men who'd been part of his crew from the 1997 armored car job. On April 14, 2003, a second helicopter appeared over Luynes prison. Same location, same open sky that still hadn't been secured even after Payet's escape 2 years earlier. The aircraft touched down in the yard, and this time 3 prisoners climbed aboard. Eric Alborio, the man who'd been arrested alongside Payet back in 1999 for the murder of Gérard Caceres, Frank Perletto, a member of organized crime from Toulon, and Michel Valero. All 3 were part of Payet's extended network, and now all 3 were free. The escape worked perfectly. The helicopter lifted off and vanished. But freedom didn't last long this time. 3 weeks later, on May 9, 2003, French police tracked all 3 men down to a rural cottage in the Vaucluse region. They were arrested without incident and brought back into custody. But the real shock, the thing that truly shook French law enforcement, wasn't that the escape had happened. It was that Payet had orchestrated the entire operation from the outside while still being a fugitive himself. He'd proven that it didn't matter which side of the prison wall he was on. He could run this play whether he was locked up or free. The method worked. The vulnerability was real, and French prisons had no answer for it. Eventually, authorities caught up with Payet too. He was recaptured and brought back into custody, and now the French justice system had a serious problem on their hands. A convicted murderer who'd escaped once, organized a second escape while on the run, and shown zero indication that he was going to stop. Payet's trial for the 1997 murder finally happened in January 2005. He stood before the court and tried one last defense. He claimed he'd never meant to kill Gérard Caceres, said he was only trying to shoot him in the legs to stop him from interfering with the robbery. The prosecutors weren't having it. They had testimony from accomplices who placed Payet as the shooter. They had forensic evidence, and they had 14 bullet wounds on a dead man's body. The court found him guilty of murder committed during an armed robbery, one of the most serious charges in the French criminal code. The sentence came down hard. 30 years in prison. Payet appealed. In May 2006, the appeals court upheld the conviction. 30 years stood. Now French authorities had a convicted murderer who'd already escaped prison once and organized another escape from the outside. They weren't taking any chances this time. Payet was officially classified as a détenu particulièrement surveillé, a prisoner under especially high surveillance. It's a designation reserved for inmates considered extreme flight risks or threats to security. He was placed in solitary confinement, and then they started moving him. The strategy was simple. Never let him stay in one place long enough to study the facility, build relationships with guards, or coordinate with people on the outside. Every few months, sometimes sooner, Payet would be transferred to a different prison without warning. He'd wake up one morning, get told to pack his things, and be relocated to a completely different part of France. No patterns, no predictability. By mid-2007, he'd been moved over 30 times in just a few years. Payet hated it. In December 2005, he published an open letter on his personal blog called The Saga of My Transfers, where he laid out exactly what this constant movement was doing to him. Before writing it, he'd gone on a hunger strike at a prison in Metz, protesting that he'd been transferred 9 times in 30 months. He called the conditions brutal and dehumanizing. The authorities didn't care. As far as they were concerned, the system was working. Payet was locked down, isolated, and under constant watch. They thought they'd finally contained him. In January 2007, Payet confessed in court to organizing the 2003 helicopter escape. He was sentenced to an additional 7 years for that. He also received 6 more years for his own 2001 escape. The numbers kept stacking. His total sentence was now well beyond what most people serve in a lifetime. And the security measures around him kept getting tighter. By July 2007, Pascal Payet was one of the most closely surveilled prisoners in all of France. He was being held at a prison in Grasse, a town in the Alpes-Maritimes region of southern France. Solitary confinement, constant monitoring, transfers every few months. The whole system designed specifically to make sure he could never pull off another escape. And then, on July 14, 2007, he did it again. The date wasn't an accident. July 14th is Bastille Day, France's biggest national holiday, celebrating the storming of the Bastille prison during the French Revolution in 1789. It's a day when the entire country celebrates freedom. Payet picked that exact day to stage the most spectacular prison break in modern French history. While the rest of France was watching fireworks and waving flags, 4 masked men hijacked a helicopter from Cannes-Mandelieu Airport on the French Riviera. They forced the pilot at gunpoint to fly north. And 20 minutes later, that helicopter descended onto the roof of Grasse Prison. 3 of the armed men jumped out of the helicopter and entered the prison. They moved fast, like they'd rehearsed this a dozen times. They knew exactly where Payet's cell was. They knew which doors to breach and which hallways to take. Within less than 5 minutes, they came back out with Payet and loaded him onto the helicopter. Not a single shot was fired. Not a single guard was injured. The pilot, who'd been forced to fly at gunpoint, later told investigators that the men assured him no one would get hurt if he just followed instructions. The helicopter lifted off the roof and flew to Brignoles, a town about 38 kilometers away on the Mediterranean coast. Once they landed, Payet and the crew disappeared. The pilot was released unharmed. 2 days later, a European arrest warrant went out for Pascal Payet, but he'd already made himself nearly impossible to find. He reportedly underwent facial plastic surgery shortly after the escape in a coastal town called La Ciotat, changing his appearance enough that recent photos were almost useless. Then he crossed into Spain and vanished into the Catalonia region. For 2 months, one of the largest manhunts in European history played out across France and Spain. French intelligence worked with Spanish authorities, tracking financial movements, surveillance footage, any lead that might reveal where Payet was hiding. On September 21, 2007, Spanish police finally caught him in Mataró, a town just north of Barcelona. He was armed when they moved in, but he didn't resist. 2 accomplices who'd been helping him stay hidden, Alain Armato and Farid Wassou, were arrested with him. Payet was extradited back to France on October 4th. This time, French authorities buried him. His location was classified as secret. He was placed in a 9-square-meter cell for 23 hours a day, with only 1 hour of exercise alone in an enclosed yard. No group activities, severe restrictions on visits and communication. In June 2008, he was sentenced to 15 years with no possibility of early release for robberies and assaults on police committed while he was on the run. In April 2011, another 5 years for the Bastille Day escape itself. His 3 accomplices got sentences ranging from 6 to 9 years. Payet's escapes forced France to completely rebuild its prison security. The country installed anti-helicopter netting and cables over every prison yard in the system. They spent 14 million euros on drone detection technology. New laws made it a serious crime to fly any aircraft near a prison. France holds the record for the most helicopter prison escapes in the world, at least 11 between 1981 and 2018. Payet's 3 escapes made him the most prolific in history. In 2019, after years under the harshest detention conditions imaginable, Pascal Payet was granted parole. He walked out and took a job working with green spaces in the Paris region. A quiet life. Legal work. It lasted 11 months. In September 2020, Payet got involved in an extortion scheme targeting a wealthy businessman in Paris. The operation involved GPS trackers, threatening phone calls, and demands for hundreds of thousands of euros. In November 2020, French tactical units arrested him, along with 8 others, in a coordinated raid. On May 25, 2023, a Paris court sentenced him to 5 years in prison for attempted extortion by an organized gang. Pascal Payet is 61 years old now and still behind bars. The prison system that couldn't hold him for decades has spent the last 17 years making absolutely sure he never sees open sky again. His story didn't just make headlines, it changed how an entire country thinks about what prison security really means.